We were the kind of couple others envied. At least that's what people used to say. Our home was always the loudest during gatherings, the most welcoming. We hosted dinner parties like it was our job, every month without fail. Our friends called it the Waters Table, a ritual that felt sacred. And maybe that's why what happened that night still feels like such a violent betrayal. Tom and I had been married for 6 years, together for 8. Our bond, once magnetic and easy, had become muted over time. He'd gotten busier with work, and I found ways to distract myself. I told myself I wasn't unhappy, just bored. That there was a difference. That it was okay. Jake was Tom's oldest friend. They'd met in college, bonded over poker nights and whiskey-fueled debates about nothing and everything. Jake was charming in a careless sort of way. He had this laugh that made people lean in, eyes that stayed too long when they looked at you. And for the past 3 months, those eyes had been looking at me. It started small. A shared glance, a casual compliment, a touch on the lower back that lingered longer than it should have. I knew I was playing with fire, but there was something addictive about the attention. It felt like being seen for the first time in forever. The night of the dinner party was ordinary on the surface. Tom had invited a small group of friends, including Jake and his latest fling, a pretty redhead named Lacey who barely said a word all evening. I'd worn a satin navy dress Tom hadn't seen before. Jake noticed. Of course he did. I remember the way Jake stood in the doorway of the kitchen while I was slicing baguettes. "You look different tonight," he said, voice low enough that it didn't travel past the tiled walls. "Different how?" I asked without turning around. "Like you remember how beautiful you are." I should have told him to stop. I should have walked away. But instead, I let the silence stretch between us like an invitation. Dinner went on without incident. We toasted to promotions, to friendships, to life. I laughed more than I meant to. And all the while, I felt his eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. After dessert, while everyone migrated to the living room, I went to the kitchen to grab another bottle of wine. He followed. Of course he did. "Do you need help?" he asked, stepping into the narrow space behind me. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But he didn't leave. He moved closer, hands brushing my waist as he reached over me to grab a glass. I froze. It was like the air had thickened, pulsing with unspoken things. "You know this is dangerous," I whispered, not daring to face him. "And yet," he murmured, "you haven't moved." And I didn't. Not when he placed his lips just behind my ear. Not when his hand slid against my lower back. Not even when the sound of laughter from the living room reminded me that my husband was just a room away. When it finally happened, it was quick, reckless, and entirely wrong. It wasn't romantic, it was desperate. His mouth found mine with a force that made me gasp, and in the tiny pantry off the kitchen, under the soft hum of the wine cooler, we broke a promise I couldn't unbreak. We returned to the party seconds apart, breathless and red-faced. I poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands, half listening to the conversation around me. Jake slid back onto the couch beside Lacey, his face unreadable. I sat next to Tom, who pulled me close and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. "Just a bit warm." He kissed my forehead, his touch gentle. "I'll turn the heat down." I smiled, a twisted kind of ache forming in my chest. That moment, his concern, his kindness, was the part that stayed with me the longest. Because in that moment, I remembered exactly who I was married to. And exactly what I'd done. Tom didn't seem to suspect anything. He kissed me goodbye in the mornings, called to check in from work like he always did. Every gesture, every routine felt like a blade. I kept waiting for the unraveling, the inevitable moment when the truth would surface. But it didn't. Instead, It festered inside me, slowly consuming every glance, every kiss, every touch. I started flinching when he reached for me in bed. I told him I was tired. Headaches. Work stress. He accepted my excuses without question, and that made it worse. Jake avoided me too. The tension between us that night had vanished, replaced by a stiff politeness whenever we crossed paths. At first, I was grateful. But then came the doubt, was he ashamed? Was I? 2 weeks after the dinner party, Tom suggested we host another. Something smaller. Just a few close friends, he said. I should have said no. I should have told him the truth. But instead, I nodded and smiled and helped plan every detail. Saturday arrived, and the house was pristine again. The wine was chilled, candles lit, music playing softly in the background. Jake and Lacey were among the first to arrive. I opened the door, heart thudding in my chest. Jake met my eyes for a fraction of a second, then looked away. Dinner passed in a blur. I barely tasted the food, my ears ringing with the hum of voices I couldn't process. Every time Tom touched my hand or leaned in close, I felt like a fraud. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confess. It was after dessert, while guests were trickling out, that it happened. Tom closed the front door behind the last couple and turned to me. His expression was calm, too calm. I need to ask you something, he said. I froze. Okay. He stepped closer, voice even. Is there anything you want to tell me about the last dinner party? My throat tightened. What do you mean? His eyes didn't waver. You disappeared with Jake. For longer than it takes to grab a bottle of wine. I tried to steady my breathing. We just talked. It wasn't. I know, he said, voice quiet. I know, Justine. And there it was. The air left my lungs. How? I whispered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Tapped the screen. My heart sank as he played a video, grainy, angled from the corner of the pantry. It showed Jake and me, locked together in that stolen moment. I covered my mouth, nauseated by the sight of it. Tom, He stopped me with a raised hand. You don't get to explain. I waited. I gave you every chance to come clean. Every damn day since that night. I didn't know how. I started, but the words felt meaningless. Tom turned away from me, pacing to the living room. I've had my suspicions for a while. Something's been off for months. I just didn't think it would be with him. My best friend. I'm sorry. I choked. I didn't mean for it to happen. That's the problem, Justine. You didn't stop it either. He sat down heavily, rubbing his hands over his face. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the slow ticking of the wall clock. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said finally. Not just for the betrayal, but for how easy you made it look. Like it didn't cost you anything. Tears burned my eyes. It cost me everything, Tom. He looked up, and his eyes were different, harder, colder. Then why did it take a camera to make you tell the truth? I didn't have an answer. Not one that would make a difference. He stood, walked to the foyer, and grabbed his coat. I'll be staying at Mark's for a while. Don't call me. Don't text. I need to decide what I want, if I want anything left of this. And with that, he was gone. I stood in the silence, surrounded by the remnants of a perfect evening built on a lie. The dishes from dinner still warm, the wine glasses half full, the laughter of our friends still echoing in the halls. But the house had never felt emptier.